In 334 BC, a 22-year-old king stood before a river that could decide the fate of Asia. On the far bank, the forces of Persia were waiting. This was not just another battle. This was Alexander's first great test. Alexander was young, but he was already driven by enormous ambition. He had inherited the throne of Macedon, and with it, his father's dream of invading the Persian Empire. To many people, that dream looked impossible. But Alexander moved fast. After crossing from Europe into Asia Minor, he pushed forward with speed and confidence. He wanted to strike before the Persians could gather their full strength. The Persian satraps of the region responded quickly. They gathered their forces near the Granicus River, believing this was the perfect place to stop the invader. If Alexander failed here, his campaign might end before it had truly begun. The Granicus was more than a river. It was a gateway into the heart of Asia Minor. Beyond it lay roads, cities, and opportunity. But first, Alexander had to survive the crossing. And that was the problem. The battlefield favored the defenders. The riverbank was steep. The water broke formation, and Persian cavalry waited on the far side, ready to strike the moment the Macedonians entered the river. In ancient warfare, attacking across a river was one of the most dangerous moves any commander could make. Men lost balance. Horses stumbled. Momentum disappeared. Some of Alexander's generals urged caution. Parmenion, one of his most experienced commanders, advised waiting. It was the safer decision. But Alexander did not want to look weak. He believed hesitation would only strengthen Persian confidence. So instead of waiting, he chose to attack. On one side of the river stood the Macedonian army, disciplined, battle-hardened, and used to following Alexander into danger. On the other side stood Persian cavalry, proud, heavily armed, and confident in their position. Alexander's greatest strength was not only his courage, it was also his discipline. His infantry, especially the Macedonian phalanx, could bring crushing force once they reached solid ground. But first, they had to get there. At the riverbank, Alexander prepared for the charge. He knew the risk. He knew many of his men might die in the crossing. And then, he rode forward anyway. The first Macedonian attack entered the water. Horses splashed forward. Spears lowered. Shields rose. Then the Persians hit them. At the waterline, the battle became chaos. Men fought in mud and current. Horses crashed into one another. Spears shattered. Shields twisted under impact. The Persians pressed hard, trying to drive the attackers back into the river. This was exactly where the defenders wanted the battle to happen. But Alexander did what he always did. He put himself in the most dangerous place on the field. He did not lead from safety. He fought in the front line, where one mistake or one lucky enemy strike could change everything. And that almost happened. Persian nobles saw Alexander and moved toward him directly. If they could kill him there, in the middle of the melee, the invasion might collapse in a single moment. Then came one of the most dangerous seconds of Alexander's life. An enemy warrior raised his weapon over him in close combat. Alexander was on the edge of death, and history almost changed right there. He survived because Clitus the Black intervened at exactly the right moment. Clitus struck down the attacker and saved Alexander's life. Without him, Alexander's story might have ended at the Granicus River. But once that moment passed, the battle began to turn. The Macedonians pushed harder. They gained ground on the far bank. What had begun as a desperate crossing started to become a breakthrough. Then the Macedonian phalanx came into the fight. With discipline, weight, and relentless pressure, the infantry helped turn chaos into momentum. The Persian cavalry line began to bend. Then it began to break. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Retreat spread across the field. The defenders lost cohesion. The position they had trusted was gone. But the battle was not fully over. Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia were left exposed after the cavalry collapsed. Alexander showed them little mercy. To him, Greeks serving Persia were traitors. When the fighting finally ended, the field around the Granicus was covered with broken weapons, fallen banners, dead horses, and shattered ambition. Alexander had survived. But more importantly, he had won. This was his first major victory against Persia. It opened the roads of Asia Minor and shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. Granicus was not his greatest battle, but it was the first proof that his ambition was not madness. Here, at this river in 334 BC, Alexander took his first giant step toward becoming a legend.